the reform program on the basis of certain HR and resources that we have available to us. So the first and the most important part of the reform that I give first priority to is the institutionalization of the reform process itself. And it's an ever evolving one. The National Electricity Plan, coming out of the policy, has more than 100 top priority areas, out of which just a few that you people pay your kind attention to, or whatever appears in the press is just being talked about. The electricity plan itself it consists of over 100 key areas which need to be pursued, and the way the sector evolves, we have to constantly try to course correct and try to keep it in place so that we move towards more efficiency. So we formed this PPMC, which is an institution which is now headed by an MD, and we're bringing into place top professionals in the energy economics area, and for people to come and do financial modeling, look at all the data, the numbers. We don't unfortunately even have a data repository that we could refer to and base our entire assumption and the models on. So PPMC would be the technical arm of the ministry in the future. It has evolved to a certain extent into an organization that is helping us a lot. So we're using people from all our development partners, that the people they've been given to us by them, by USAID, FCDO, the GIZ people, everybody is contributing, ADB. So we're making use of them, but we're institutionalizing that into a proper institution. So that is the basis of our reform. Other than that, our reform is basically hinging on 3 or 4 key areas: privatization, uh, restructuring of some of the inefficient organizations, and the opening up of the markets, and also taking stock of the horrible burden of uh, least cost violation based energy that we were supposed to buy. It's not just what we bought in the past, but what we had considered as committed power through our IGSEP programs, our IGSEP mechanism, that was also seriously flawed. So just before I came here, I almost went through the last episode of reviewing the IGSEP, in which I can very comfortably and confidently say that more than half, a lot more than half, of the plants that you were expecting us to buy the CPP in the future, those have to be trashed because because they all violate the least cost methodology that we as policymakers have approved. So once we are rid of all that burden, we are also going to make soon a very conscious decision: no more buying by the CPP in future, of any more power. So after these 7,000 odd committed plants that we cannot get out of, which have their financial closes done, the construction is at an advanced stage. Beyond this, the CPPA will not buy in the future. So I think this will open space and keep that space open for efficiency to kick in, at least through the generation process, and people like yourselves will be able to sell and buy power in the future. The ISMO has been incorporated, the market operator, officially with the SECP, and the market should be operational within the next 3 to 4 months. And we've also now decided, hopefully soon to be approved by the Prime Minister himself, that within the next 4 years, we'll give you a clear roadmap, quarterly basis for the first year, and then onwards on an annual basis, of the amount of wheeling that we would allow for existing players on the grid to get off the grid and then wheel the power required for their own usage. In order to do that, who gets to wheel first? I think we'll try to have an open, transparent mechanism in place with after discussions with the industry as to what is the most efficient way to do it. So whatever was the dream for the past 10, 15 years, I think we are very close to realizing that in terms of operationalization of the market itself. And you should very realistically assume and uh, consider that this market would be operational gradually over the next 2 to 4 years.
Thank you so much.
There are other parts of it, but we can talk along.
I think for our audience, so we talked about that this reform is going to result into a tariff reduction, and we looked at some of the numbers. If you could share that, what are you looking at in terms of, we've heard about the April 1st date, and if you could tell us the breakup of how these savings are going to be and how these reforms that you are doing are going to make it sustainable as well. So the tariff saving or a reduction in the tariff, what will be the components so that we can keep that whether the reforms in those areas are on track or not?
April 1st isn't a very reliable date.
No, somebody has been, I'm just quoting what
It could
has
be
been
April.
reported.
It could be April 2nd or March 31st. I don't know. It really depends on how our development partners look at the whole process. So it's not just we're trying to put across to everyone who's been helping us stabilize our economy and bring in reforms that they need to take it and they need to consider our proposals as they need to look at it holistically. So it's just not a reduction in the price that we want. We are moving along through a reform process that would ensure the sustainability of it in the future. So just by a reduction of price through IPP contracts being reviewed, or by taxes being, the burden of the taxes being removed from the tariff part of it, and then shifting it to other parts of the economy, or raising resources enough and mobilizing them enough to compensate for that reduction in revenues that we'll have. That is not just it. I think the Pakistan does deserve to be looked at sympathetically by our development partners in the future. And I think all of us can play a role in trying to convince them. And if we are coming up with the opening up of the markets, the privatization program itself, of the distribution companies, depoliticization of boards, privatization of the GenCos, closing down of expensive power, allowing renewables to take space within Pakistan, which they have already assumed, EV tariffs, the availability of surplus power to the industry at marginal costs. So if you're taking all these measures, then the development partners also need to be considerate enough to allow us to nationalize a certain part of the debt and the debt servicing of this sector, which has assumed a very prominent situation of where it's scary for us because of devaluation of the rupee and all. And the tariff structure itself cannot sustain that. We can't be regionally competitive. So what we are looking at is usme nationalization of the debt itself to a certain extent, reducing the taxes, and also reviewing of the contracts of the government-owned plants, the nuclear power plants, the IPPs, all this in total, and the trying our efforts to get rid of the secular debt. I think the interest rates today do merit a certain strategy that we have already evolved, and we are going to talk to people within our economy to try to see if we could also have a clear way forward for the to clear off our circular debt of the power sector.
Thank you so much. I mean, you talked about a lot of planning and I think things that you were not in the past. Just to highlight that when we were talking about the energy shortage in 2008 to 2013-14, there was a big conversation about import reliance because the furnace oil plants were run by the imported fuel. and we put up a lot of power, and a lot of it was on the foreign debt, which you just highlighted. Number two, we had an imported fuel, 5,000 megawatts is on an imported fuel, which is already now also cannibalizing onto the domestic fuel, which is coal as well. How do you think that this change in the or focus on the planning is not going to result into, because people talk about 300 billion rupees excess being built because you have to operate RLNG plants in the center, and that means that you cannot run local coal or imported coal or the cheaper, as mentioned. How this exercise is going to result into not a repeat of it. And I'll just add to it, which is the current conversation, the captive gas pricing has been changed. Don't you think that there should have been a grid transition plan and a gradual one so that the people were ready? Because the conversation or the feedback that we hear from the industry is grid is not reliable for the process industry. So while the pricing signal is right, the readiness is not there for people to go to that. So both.
Okay, so I'll try to handle the captive power first. You see, when we talk to businesses and when we interact with them, reliability is one of the major factors other than the disparity in price on the on-grid, for the on-grid people and the captive guys. Now, the reliability part, we've already drafted service level agreements for the first time. We've shared those with Karachi Electric and all the discos owned by the government. Those should be shared with the industry stakeholders very soon. I'm sure they would have shared them with you. I don't know if they have or not. They should by now. So there have to be service level agreements put in place for the reliability factor to actually kick in. And this is international standards. So in the past month and a half, we've done an exercise, gone through an exercise where we would be ready to now, with your approval, because both parties need to agree to refine these SLAs and to put them in place in effect as of yesterday. So the priority has been given, and if they haven't reached out to you people, they will do that in the next couple of days. The other step that we took recently when a case of special economic zones came up, for Rashaka especially, so we didn't want it to be a one-off thing and for just one zone. So I did propose to the Prime Minister and he kindly approved that all industrial estates in the country and all special or non-special economic zones within their own limits could now operate and run the distribution system themselves. So we would give them electricity at one point and then no XCNs or chief engineers or SCs to deal with. So you want to enhance your load, you want to add on new connections, the management of the industrial estate would be fully empowered to do that, and we would give them a certain margin to maintain and operate that part of the system within them. So this would hopefully get it much more, or get it to be a lot easier for the industry to operate. The captive power plants, yes. Well, to be fair, I think the captive gas power plant users have had a fair enough idea, and we've been writing to them from our ministry for the past 7-8 months now, but people did not respond. I think the reduction of the removal of disparity in price itself and the structure, along with the reliability issues that we are responsible to do, I think both these might encourage them to and make them more comfortable to make this transition. We do realize that some of them are not prepared, the discos are not prepared, some might take 6 months. We have an entire list of how many could go onto the grid in how long a period. So I think the discos would try their best to assist the industry so that there isn't anything negative on that.
Okay. Thank you so much.
I forgot the first part.
The first one was that, again, the same thing, the planning that, we still rely on the imported fuel, the RLNG.
Imported fuel का मैं आपको बता दूं. You see, if we continue with the imported coal, the dispatch factor of the imported plants on imported coal is not going to be there. The way we're looking at IGSEP, if they remain on imported coal and if they continue to be dispatched according to the merit order, even if the transmission constraints are removed, even if Rahimar Khan Batiari is done, reactive power in Sindh is done, even if Ghazi Barota Faisalabad is done, even if the battery storage for wind is done, but all these four projects are expected to be, and we are following strict timelines, to be completed by the end of 27. Even if they are done, and even if you do consider all the power that's going to come onto the grid, plus the 8,000 odd megawatts in the next 10 years that we're expecting on the distributed solar coming on, even without all that, the dispatch factor for imported coal will be very low. So we've already initiated a study with KE on Jamshoro. We've talked to the Chinese about it. They're relying more on the results of this bankable document that comes out of the KE Jamshoro study. And then the Chinese have agreed to talk to us on the basis of that for conversion of imported coal to no, for the rest of the three plants. So we are initiating with the Jamshoro part. It's going to cost us some money to do the study. They wanted us to do it in any case. He said, unless I have a bankable document with me, can't expect Jamshoro to plunge into coal conversion without that. So by June, we had a stock taking meeting this morning, and by June this year, we should have a clear idea of what the economics of conversion would be on Jamshoro.
So don't you think that there is a merit, as you said, that the local coal or the imported coal, which are free or at this point in time in South, that we do away with the uniform tariff? Because if there is a cheap power available in the South, maybe that should be encouraged for 3 to 5 years, the timeline that you're offering. So,
there are different views. We've been discussing those. Number one, and this might be quite exactly related to what you asked because आपने एक और angle से पूछा. You see, uniform tariff in Pakistan, with the discourse privatization happening, is not sustainable. It's not doable. It's not feasible. It's not going to give any incentive to any geographic unit, political, administrative, or economic, or any business. Is not going to give it any incentive to bring in efficiencies into its operation. So, in my humble opinion, had Karachi Electric, as an example of the only privatized disco, had there not been uniform tariff for their recovery percentages, reduction in losses, would have been much better than what it is now. So the Q block sustaining through tariff differential subsidy an environment which is not sustainable anymore because of the high cost of it is a non-starter. So we've already tasked some people at the ministry and at the PPMC, and this is the kind of work we're now doing at PPMC. We are creating a working paper and an initial dialogue process through which we are going to engage with all the political stakeholders to open debate on non-uniform tariffs to kick into Pakistan over the next, let there be a transition period of 1, 2, 3 years. But to sustain a uniform tariff environment beyond the privatization process stage will not be possible. And I think we need to remove that. जहाँ तक आपकी surplus power in the south and north की बात है, तो अभी इस वक्त we are looking at two possible things. We came up with the Bijli Sahulat package for 3 months. It was, the IMF gave us the go-ahead very late in the day. We wanted to get the industry to be more prepared, to be able to add on to their workload and shifts. In spite of that, a month-on-month 7% increase in demand of the industry has been seen as compared to last December. I strongly feel, and we have very clear visibility, other than 2 months in a year, we are surplus in power for the next 3 years. So, do we give at a marginal cost the same tariff for incremental demand across the country, or do we create a disparity between regions because of the transmission constraints? Even if we have a uniform advantage that we pass on, your energy surplus energy cost would not be, it's coming out to be not more than 21, 22, 23 rupees a unit. That's fairly efficient. Now, we're also thinking of bringing in a time of use kind of a concept. Because from 7 o'clock in the morning until about noon, past noon, there is a time in the marginal cost of power being produced is not more than 10, 12, 14 rupees. उस वक्त जब ऑन ग्रिड डिस्ट्रीब्यूटेड सोलर आ रहा होता है, what is the cost? So we are looking at all ways possible, like energy companies. I was giving this example to the charge d'affaires of the US Embassy, who was kind enough to come and visit us this morning. I was giving them the example of this company called Duke Energy in the US. So they're coming up with all sorts of solutions to get. So the thinking is clear. I am not ready to, as the Minister for Power, keep any surplus power to myself just because people are not ready and the industry is not ready to pay the entire cost of it. So whatever they can afford to pay, whatever the marginal cost is, we'll be much more than happy to share that advantage with everybody for economic growth to happen.
No, that's good to know. The only thing that I would expect that, while we are doing all these reforms, the demand has been dwindling, right? So the technology advancement in the solar, it made it affordable for people to renege the grid. You have a net metering challenge. I think we delay our action so much that now people have an incentive, and by the time we do away with the net metering, the battery will become a lot more affordable at a much smaller scale because China is actually now the prices are driving down. Wouldn't it be prudent to actually offer the electricity to the industry so that there is a stable demand? Pakistan suffers from a high peak and a high trough, right? So these days, I'll just give you an example because we operate projects in Thar, which is the cheapest electron. We are operating at a 50% for the last 1 month, right? I mean, that's a power that cannot be dispatched because there is not enough load in the system. That's 10 to 12,000 megawatts. And in the summers, it goes to 28, 29, which shows that there is mostly the heating and the cooling load rather than the industrial load. So don't you think that there should be some sort of an industrial tariff? You look at the sectors, whichever sector is the most productive to the economy, you look at it because you need to have demand to solve this excess power situation as well. Otherwise, I think if they renege the grid, we will have a situation in 3 to 5 years when people will look at their own standalone solutions. As just last week, Masdar announced 5 gigawatt solar and 19 gigawatts hour battery storage, 24 hours data centers. So it is not far when we would actually be talking about this.
I could not agree with you more. I think we've got one of the most unhealthy profile of power consumers in the world. I think our steady demand doesn't go beyond 11,000 megawatts. Our peak demands hits about 29,000. Unfortunately, because of lack of energy conservation building codes, lack of investment into conservation of energy, so it's basically heating and the cooling load that we have. So it's the fans and the air conditioners and whatever else. एक तो अभी recently, that was a part of our power division's responsibility. We did ask all the 4 provinces, and I would appreciate if the Pakistan Business Council also encourages different policymakers to adopt the building code so that going into the future, we have more efficient structures being invested into rather than energy inefficient ones that raise the peak to a point which is absolutely not sustainable. On the other side, whatever I talked of surplus power and trying to offer incremental power usage for the next 3 years instead of just 3 months, giving you clear visibility to do that, and then maybe adding on to that portfolio a certain time of use further cheaper power. I think, say, for instance, just as an example, if we offer the industry 8 hours of power during the daylight hours, which is at 15 rupees per unit, just off the cuff figures, not committing
No, we
or
won't hold
stating
you to
anything.
it. We won't
No.
hold you to it, but
No,
we
no,
would
no.
like some
No,
initiative.
no, I'm not even saying it for the media consumption for them to be kind enough to give me some headlines for a day or two. This is just an internal discussion. So suppose the industry is offered 10, 12, 14 rupees of power for those 8 hours. Would the industry still rather invest into technologically improving their processes or buy solar power for those few hours to furnish itself? Yes, technological advancements are going to be there. Batteries have to kick into the system. We are really concerned about what happens when the distributed solar systems start pumping in power on the basis of the battery storage they do in the off-peak or in the off-the-daylight hours. What happens then? आपको पता है right now the preparedness of your grid is such, unfortunately, और अभी we're about to come up with regulations. एक तो the solar net metering regulations have to change. हो ही नहीं सकता कि we can sustain the same cost of buying power from distributed solar the way we are, number one. दूसरा, we don't even know what the on-grid non-net metered. There is one on-grid non-net metered and there's an on-grid net metered power that has serious implications onto the grid. Unfortunately, in our regulations today, we don't even know what that power is doing onto our feeders, what the inconsistency of signals and whatever they call it are doing to the grid. So we have more regulations भी लेके आ रहे हैं, and distributed solar will play an important role. And we are not just talking of incremental power for the industry. For the existing industry, for the brownfield, yes, incremental has to be the way forward, just to make sure that there's no disparity between the newcomers and the old guys and everybody. But for greenfield projects, data centers, artificial intelligence based processes that are required, aluminum smelting plants, for such greenfield industry, yes, they could be also included to have marginal rated prices for power, even for greenfield projects. I am convinced, and I perfectly realize and appreciate the fact, sir, what you're saying, that the industrial demand has to go up. There is no other way. And then once this surplus demand has been taken up, let the market forces be the most efficient ones to determine what comes in what part of the country and what gets added on according to whatever the transmission capacity and capabilities are.
So this is the last question before I open up. I think we've talked about privatization, and I've referred to it the 1992 power plan where the distribution companies were supposed to privatize before the generation came onto the grid. I mean, how can we really get on with it? Because I think that is where we've struggled over the last 20 odd years, that there has not been a privatization. And I think all the things that you've talked about and we have seen and witnessed in the K Electric, the reduction in the line losses, what used to be, in my opinion, the NTDC was a very, very good institution, and now with the grid constraints and everything, things are not going well. So there is a merit to do this and expedite it. Is there like a timeline that we can put it? Because we keep hearing about preparing these discos to be privatized, and that phase has never ended over the last 10 years at least I have witnessed. Is there a timeline that we can actually look at? Because that's also very important for the government to get out of this business of energy and bring efficiency.
I remember when I was 32 years old and I came into the federal cabinet as an IT minister. and they have been talking of the PTCL privatization for more than 20 years. I think you have to have the will and the ownership and the courage to do it. Thank God my Prime Minister has that. And thank God we at the Power Division are absolutely sick and tired of managing the discourse, not interested. I think the first step was to get away from political boards. We did that. Unfortunately, two companies have still not done that because of political compulsion. Very unfortunate, and they are suffering. They bled 30 billion rupees more than they bled last year, the same 5 months. Everybody else did better. Our circular debt figures in the past 5 months are 300 billion rupees better than what they were envisaged to be in the budget. So distribution companies, I have to prepare them for the privatization. I don't want to end up like PIA. It has to be, and we are well prepared now. The balance sheets are about to get, the finance ministry is going out of its way to support me on this. We are hand in glove on this. The privatization transaction advisors should be on board by the 7th of February. Not and will not and should not give any dates for the RFPs. I don't want to be, and the Privatization Commission and myself, we don't want to be immature enough to start throwing out dates now. We will prepare, we will look at the appetite of the market. The transaction has to be so well architectured that it removes all fears of investors, especially after the IPP contract review process. Number one, it will be a competitive one. It will not be an upfront tariff or any such arrangement. So that competitive process itself will help investors get more confidence. And the most important part, sir, is about the property issues in privatization, about no property issues in concession agreements. Today we've also been given the go-ahead to hire advisors for the 3 concession agreement discourse. So it's not just Islamabad, Gujranwala and Faisalabad, it's also Sakar, Hyderabad and Peshawar. But that we'll do after the transaction. So in the next 2.5 to 3 years, if all goes well, inshallah, by the grace of God, we are expecting for at least 8 of the 10 discourse, if there is appetite in you people to invest into these distribution companies, we should be expecting to get rid of these 8 discos over the next 3 odd years, hopefully.